Bristol, January 27th, 2024. A bitterly cold Saturday night. On the streets of Knowle West, two teenage boys were out doing what teenagers do, kicking about, catching up, enjoying a bit of freedom. Max Dixon was 16, Mason Wrist was 15, best mates, inseparable. They weren't looking for trouble. They had no idea it was about to find them. Moments later, a grey Audi pulled up. 4 masked teenagers leapt out, armed with knives and machetes. What followed was fast and feral. Max and Mason were chased down and stabbed repeatedly on the pavement. The attackers fled, and 2 boys were left bleeding out in the dark. Despite the best efforts of emergency crews, neither of them made it. Max and Mason died in hospital. 2 lives lost, 2 families broken, and a city left stunned by the sheer savagery of what had just happened. But this wasn't random. It was a revenge hit, part of a violent feud between 2 areas of Bristol, Hartcliffe and Knowle West. The killers had come looking for payback after a rival gang attacked a home linked to their side, but they got it wrong. Max and Mason weren't involved, they were just there, in the way. Over the next 11 months, detectives would piece together what really happened that night. A planned ride out, a car packed with weapons, a group of teenagers led by an older boy with a score to settle, and a getaway driver old enough to be their dad. The motive was simple, vengeance, but the result was anything but. This is the story of a brutal mistake, of a gang out for blood, and 2 boys who never saw it coming. A case that shocked Bristol and showed just how far postcode violence can reach. At the centre of this ride-out was Riley Toer, just 18 years old but already deep in the world of postcode violence. Born and raised in Weston-super-Mare, Toer wasn't from Bristol, but he had ties to Hartcliffe and carried himself like someone with something to prove. In the eyes of police, he wasn't just part of the problem, he was the one pulling the strings. It was Toer who gathered the group. Teenagers aged 15, 16 and 17, each of them still in school, still technically children, but drawn into something far more dangerous. He rallied them in the days after an earlier attack, an incident involving damage to a house connected to their group. Police believe it was a warning shot from rivals in Knowle West. For Toer, it was personal, and he wanted payback. But this wasn't rage in the heat of the moment. It was planned, calculated. On the night of January 27th, Toer got into a grey Audi Q2 driven by Anthony Snook, a 45-year-old man with a long criminal record and zero regard for the fact he was about to chauffeur a group of kids to commit murder. Toer wasn't just along for the ride. He was the one leading the charge, egging the others on, steering the mood. Prosecutors would later describe the group as a pack of wolves, and Toer was at the front. This was about reputation, about showing force, about making sure the other side knew they couldn't be touched without consequences. But what makes this case even harder to stomach is how wrong they got it. Toer and the others thought they'd spotted someone linked to the earlier attack. Instead, they found Max and Mason. It didn't matter. They fit the profile, same area, same look, wrong place. That was enough. On that night in January, Riley Toer made a decision to turn a petty feud into a killing. And it was a decision that would ruin lives, including his own. The Audi moved slowly through the quiet streets of Knowle West. Inside the car, 5 people sat with a single purpose. Riley Toer, already hardened, watched from the front passenger seat. Beside him, Anthony Snook, a criminal who should have known better, kept the engine steady. In the back were 3 teenage boys, younger still, each masked, each holding a weapon. They weren't sightseeing. This was a ride-out, preparation for a revenge attack after a house linked to their group in Hartcliffe had been targeted. That earlier incident hadn't left anyone dead. This one would. They didn't have a name, or a face, or a real target. Just a direction, a location. a desire to hurt someone, anyone they believed was connected to the other side of the postcode war. It didn't matter who it was, as long as they were from Knoll West. That was enough. As they drove down Ilminster Avenue, the car slowed. Two boys were walking up ahead, hoods up, heads down, side by side. 16-year-old Max Dixon, 15-year-old Mason Wrist. They had nothing to do with the feud, no weapons, no threats, no links to gangs, just two friends out on a Saturday night. The Audi passed them once, then looped around. CCTV would later capture what happened next. The car swung back towards the boys, slowing just enough. Doors burst open. 4 teenagers jumped out and ran. There was no conversation, no warning, only violence. Max and Mason tried to run. They didn't get far. One was chased onto a driveway. The other pinned down near a parked car. What followed was fast, frenzied, and brutal. They were stabbed again and again, each wound more savage than the last. There was no pause, no sign of mercy. The attackers struck with precision as though they'd done it before. Then, just as quickly, they were gone. Back in the car, disappearing into the night. People nearby heard the screaming. Neighbors ran outside. Calls to 999 flooded in. Police arrived within 60 seconds. Paramedics followed close behind, but it wasn't enough. Max died in the street. Mason held on a little longer, but the injuries were too severe. He died in hospital not long after. 2 lives ended for nothing. The knives used were large, some described as machete-sized. These weren't pocket blades or weapons grabbed in the heat of the moment. They had been brought for this. Every one of the teenagers had come prepared to kill. Later in court, the prosecution described it as a pack attack, a planned act of violence, and although none of the victims were the intended target, that didn't seem to matter to those responsible. They came to cause harm, and they didn't leave disappointed. But what they left behind was irreversible. In the hours after the attack, Bristol's streets were tense. Police cordoned off Ilminster Avenue. Crime scene tape stretched across pavements, where blood still marked the spot Max and Mason had fallen. Officers combed the area through the night, but while the streets were quiet behind the scenes, the work was just beginning. The case was immediately handed to Avon and Somerset Police's major crime investigation team. It was clear from the outset this wasn't going to be a quick win. The suspects had vanished without a trace, wearing masks, armed and silent. There was no known link between the victims and the attackers. This wasn't gang on gang, this was a mistake. That made it harder and more urgent. The breakthrough came from the city's surveillance network. Bristol is one of the most heavily monitored urban areas in the UK, and detectives used that to their advantage. Dozens of hours of CCTV footage were pulled and reviewed. From there, investigators began tracing the vehicle's movements in reverse. The car was tracked across neighbourhoods, seen picking up individuals earlier in the night. Eventually, it led them to Anthony Snook, the registered driver, the man with a criminal past, now caught on camera driving 4 armed teenagers to the scene of a double murder. Snook's arrest gave police the first piece of the puzzle, but he wasn't talking.
Mr. Snook, can you just listen to my colleague a minute? Is that okay?
Hello. So the circumstances have now changed, so I'll be placing you under arrest for murder, 1 count of murder. So you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence, okay? So the circumstances are still the same. Your vehicle was linked to where the stabbing has taken place, and subsequently someone has been murdered, all right? So the necessities are for prompt and effective investigation, protect vulnerable person, protect from further offences, all right? Okay?
We're just going to carry on to custody now,
Yeah,
okay?
we'll carry on to custody.
The forensic work began next. Officers found DNA evidence on the inside of the car. Blood traces, fibres, glove prints. Clothing discarded nearby was later recovered, linking back to several suspects. Social media was also monitored. Within days, posts and messages began to surface, not from the attackers directly, but from the wider circle, people hinting at what had happened, others bragging, some just trying to make sense of it all. Word was spreading fast. But so was the police net. One by one, the suspects were identified. The youngest was just 15, the others 16 and 17. All had prior contact with youth services. Some were already on the police radar. Their names couldn't be published at first, protected by law due to their age. But inside interrogation rooms, detectives began to link them to the scene. Some denied everything. One stayed silent. Another confessed. It was painstaking work. 11 months of cross-department coordination involving neighborhood policing teams, forensics, drone surveillance and firearms units on standby. Each suspect was tracked, matched to evidence and eventually charged. At every stage, Max and Mason's families were kept informed. They sat through interviews, case updates, and later court hearings, waiting to hear how two boys with no part in any feud had ended up the victims of one of Bristol's most devastating street attacks in recent memory. The investigation didn't just uncover what happened. It revealed how far some were willing to go for revenge and how quickly the wrong people can pay the ultimate price. The arrests came in waves. Once police had the names, they moved quickly. Avon and Somerset's major crime unit launched a coordinated operation to bring every suspect in, fast, hard, and without warning. This wasn't just about knocking on doors. These were violent offenders, some believed to still be carrying weapons. Armed officers were deployed. The drone unit was called in to watch from above. Surveillance teams tracked movement around estates in Hartcliffe and Weston-super-Mare. And then, in the early hours, they moved. Anthony Snook was first. He was arrested at his home in Hartcliffe, caught completely off guard. He didn't resist. When officers told him he was being arrested for murder, he didn't say a word. It was a quiet moment that carried the full weight of what he was facing. A man in his 40s, twice the age of the others, now accused of helping children carry out a double killing. The teenagers were picked up shortly after. One was arrested at home, another found hiding at a relative's address. The 15-year-old, the youngest of them all, was taken into custody while his parents looked on, stunned. The group didn't fight the arrests. No car chases, no last stands, just silence.
That was right. Yeah. So, intelligence has received naming you along with others as being responsible for the murders of Max Dixon and Mason Rist on Saturday, 27th of January 2014 at around 2300.
Okay. At the moment, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything. It may harm your defence. You don't mention one question second later on in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence.
But what followed sent shockwaves through the city. When the details were released, the reaction was instant, not just to the brutality of the attack, but to the ages of those responsible. Teenagers, children by legal definition. Armed with machetes, moving like seasoned criminals, carrying out an execution-style assault on the wrong people. Even seasoned officers said they were shaken by how casually it had been planned and carried out. Searches of their homes turned up more. Clothes matching CCTV, burner phones, messages, incriminating conversations that helped cement timelines. Some of the teenagers had even changed outfits after the attack, discarding evidence in bins and alleyways. But not everything had been cleaned up, and with each piece recovered, the case became clearer. In interview rooms, the suspects reacted in different ways. The 15-year-old eventually pleaded guilty to one of the murders. The others offered half-truths, denials, or silence, but the forensic trail was already there. The CCTV, the phone data, the shared responsibility. In the eyes of the law, they were all part of the same plan. And that plan had ended in 2 deaths. For Max and Mason's families, the takedown brought little relief. Nothing would bring the boys back. But seeing the suspects named, charged, and remanded offered something else. The beginning of justice. The city, still reeling, now watched as 5 suspects faced trial for one of Bristol's darkest nights. 2 innocent boys were dead. But the people responsible were finally behind bars awaiting their fate. When the verdicts came in, the courtroom fell silent. The families of Max Dixon and Mason Rist, who had sat through every grim detail, every frame of CCTV, every expert witness, finally had an answer. Guilty, all of them. Riley Toa, 18 years old, convicted of both murders. He'd led the attack, armed the group, and orchestrated the ride-out that ended in 2 deaths. The jury saw through his defense with ease. He was no passenger. He was the driving force. The 15-year-old, the youngest of the group, had already pleaded guilty. The others, aged 16 and 17, were found guilty by majority verdicts after lengthy deliberation. All 3 were named publicly once the trial ended. Childhood anonymity stripped away. Then there was Anthony Snook. At 45, he'd acted as the enabler, the adult in the car, the man trusted with a license and a vehicle, who instead became the driver for a murder team. He claimed he didn't know what was going to happen, but the evidence said otherwise. He circled the streets. He waited while they attacked. He drove them away. 2 counts of murder, guilty on both. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back.
The CCTV capturing their brutal cutting down by these defendants is shocking and distressing viewing.
Each of the teenagers was handed a life sentence. Because of their age, the minimum terms varied. The 15-year-old, who admitted his role early on, received a shorter minimum, but still over a decade. The others were told they would serve at least 16, 17, and in Toa's case, 18 years before even being considered for release. Snook was also jailed for life. His minimum term, 28 years. By the time he's eligible for parole, he'll be in his 70s. On paper, it sounds like justice. 5 people convicted and locked away. But for Max and Mason's families, those numbers mean little. What is a life sentence to a mother who will never see her son again? What does 18 years mean when your child died before reaching adulthood? Compared to other recent UK murder cases involving youth gangs and postcode violence, the sentences are consistent. In the case of Keon Lincoln, a 15-year-old boy stabbed and shot to death in Birmingham, multiple teenagers received life with similar minimum terms. The courts have drawn a hard line when it comes to group attacks, especially those involving premeditation, weapons, and innocent victims. The message is clear. If you join in, you're responsible for everything that happens. Still, it's hard not to feel the weight of what's been lost. 5 boys now face much of their lives behind bars. One man has thrown away his future and whatever was left of his reputation. But none of it brings back Max and Mason. None of it restores the families broken by a 10-second attack carried out on a cold street for no reason at all. Justice was served by the letter of the law. But outside the courtroom, nothing about this feels balanced. 2 boys are gone. And nothing about that is fair.